The arrest of this man, Celso Gamboa Sanchez, a former security minister and judge, is the first of its kind in Costa Rica. In June 2025, Gamboa was arrested in San Jose on alleged international drug trafficking charges, following a federal indictment filed by the United States, which included a request for his extradition. Something which was made possible only in May 2025, when an amendment to the Constitution meant that Costa Rican nationals could be extradited to the US or other countries with bilateral agreements on international drug trafficking and terrorism charges. It is alleged that Gamboa had connections with Clan del Golfo in Colombia and was responsible for coordinating the receipt of cocaine in Costa Rica before sending the drugs onto Honduras, Mexico, Guatemala, and the United States.
Gamboa has spoken publicly denying the allegations. He said, "If I am not extradited by the Criminal Court of San Jose, I will be the first one to go to Texas to see what this is all about. I will not allow myself to be tarnished."
For decades, Costa Rica has been seen as one of Latin America's more stable countries, but that image is being challenged. According to the Organized Crime Index, criminality in the country has increased notably, from 4.99 out of 10 in 2021 to 5.53 out of 10 in 2023. This score moves Costa Rica into the high criminality category. In particular, cocaine trafficking is becoming increasingly pervasive in Costa Rica. The cocaine trade scored 7.5 out of 10 on the OC Index in 2023, an increase of 0.5 since 2021. Meanwhile, there has been a similar increase in both mafia-style groups and foreign criminal actors, illustrating a growing problem for Costa Rica. So, what does the high-profile arrest of Gamboa tell us about the international drug trafficking networks, corruption, and mafia-style groups in Costa Rica and the region, and what measures are being taken to combat organized crime? With me to discuss this is Mauricio Vieira, the chair on countering illicit trade and preventing transnational organized crime at the University for Peace. Mauricio, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you very much for having me in this podcast edition.
Now, my first question relates to Gamboa. The United States had actually referenced his alleged drug trafficking offenses in 2024. But it wasn't until June 2025, which is a month after the change in the Constitution, that the US actually filed for his extradition. How long have the US known about Gamboa's involvement, do you think? And also, were his criminal activities widely known in general?
I arrived in Costa Rica in 2021 to work at University for Peace. And at the time, I started understanding and realizing a common narrative that explain and commonly people say that Costa Rica has no criminal activity, being just a transit country for illicit economies or illicit goods. But when we criticize this narrative, we can ask a simple question. If a country is considered only for transit, what are the criminal dynamics or criminal networks or criminal groups that enable this transit to occur? And I conducted a research that was published last year that was about the quantity of criminal groups disarticulated in the country from 2010 to 2023, 14 years of analysis. And for my surprise, Costa Rica and the policy on drug control disarticulated 1,842 criminal groups. I only have this quantity, this number, but the analysis in that reflects that these criminal organizations are divided into three categories. Local criminal groups that correspond to 1,076 criminal groups in this category that was disarticulated by the police department, the police on drug control. International criminal groups, 399 criminal groups under this category, and narco families, 367 criminal organizations under this category. So when we analyze these numbers reflect a criminal dynamic in the country that contradicts the narrative that is commonly understood and perceived by society and public officials. So this reflects that this is a challenge and a need to change the narrative in understanding the criminality of the country. So how this connect to the case of Celso Gamboa, and connecting to your question, it is important to emphasize that this arrest of Celso Gamboa is not a disarticulation of a criminal group. It is an arrest of a man that has its linkage since he was in a political position that was benefiting criminal activities in the country. So, and based on some of the news that was reported at the time, investigations on Celso Gamboa started 3 years ago. But then there was an evidence of his involvement in criminal activities, mainly corruption cases, since 2018. So it is also in the same time frame that I conducted this research. But since there was no identification of criminal groups and any name of political person involved in this disarticulation, there is importance to understand that there is a connection on disarticulating, investigating, and the arrest of Celso Gamboa.
The numbers that you have cited are quite shocking because your research dates back to more than a decade, and that this has been happening for quite a long time. And like you said, that goes very much counter to the general perception of what Costa Rica is, especially when it comes to organized crime.
Yes, thing. And also important to understand that when I analyzed the data, there is no reference on what a criminal group means by the police drug department control that was responsible for this arrest. And also there is no quantity of persons involved in this disarticulation. We only have the quantity of criminal groups that are being disarticulated by the police department, which is a huge number, but in quantity of how many people, from where they are from, and what other nationalities are involved in these criminal dynamics, there is at the moment no data that connects us to these analysis that I provided, but there is a big question mark on how this criminal dynamic can also provide us more in-depth analysis of the criminal situation of Costa Rica.
Now, you said earlier that, from your knowledge, the investigation into Gamboa started about 3 years ago. And do you think that was when the US started to be, I guess, started to be interested, or maybe that's when the US started to know that, such a high profile figure might be involved in this activities, and that it's not generally a well-known fact within Costa Rica itself that he was involved in this?
From what I analyzed on this case, it was 3 years ago, and also the ministry, the prosecutor that is involved in the investigation, it's one of his testimonials through the news. But also, I think that was a big red flag since a corruption case in 2018 that he lost completely his political position at the government. I think that that was one of the red flags, but also the way that he started also advocating for criminal groups in the country. So he was involved as a reference, as a lawyer in defending criminal organizations in the country. So also this connects us to the way how the DEA was interested in investigating more on Celso Gamboa, but also in collaboration with the government of Costa Rica at the time. And it is important to emphasize the power of international cooperation on providing investigation and collaborating investigation on such challenging situation in the country.
Now, one other thing that the US enforcement authorities found about Gamboa was also that this drug trafficking operation that he was working with have ties with the Clan del Golfo in Colombia and also the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico. Could you tell us how these mafia-style groups work together in the region?
It is a common understanding on how they work not only in the region but in many parts of the world, that is identifying key actors that could provide information to protect their criminal activities. And I think that was happened here in Costa Rica. And also the way that mafia style groups work in the region with the support of Gamboa here, it reflects how criminal activity depends on other structures, not formal ones but informal ones that have access to information that could protect them, and also how the routes could change over time in order to minimize being arrested, or minimize their financial loss. And also, through what I analyzed from this case is that it involves not only Costa Rican per se, but a more broad dynamic that connects Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, the US with many other actors. So this is not a Costa Rican case only. This is a case that involves Central America, North America, through a corridor that we know, but we do not know yet because it depends specifically on the route that they were using for transit of this drug.
That's so interesting. But let's stay in Costa Rica for a moment. I said earlier in the introduction that, the country's criminality score actually, according to the index, increased from 4.99 in 2021 to 5.53 in 2023. And that moved it from the low criminality to the high criminality quadrant. And your own research has also shown that, there has been these criminal groups. How is this affecting Costa Rica's security and justice institutions? What new challenges are emerging for them?
The main challenge that I identify is to recognize that this is a national problem. And these change completely the narrative that is usually perceived in the country. So that is one of the main challenges. The other one is design a strategy for security. Costa Rica approved a security plan, but a plan needs a strategy to be implemented, in a sense that what are the specific actions to take place, and what are the other actors that could collaborate with the Ministry of Security to counter organized crime and other illicit activities. Also, the challenge is to provide and enable capacity building for police officers, but not only capacity building, but also a way that the country, the government and institutions could identify security strategies to protect those that counter organized crime, that are in the front of the arrest of these criminal groups.
Let's talk about the change in Costa Rica's constitution, which essentially, enabled Gamboa to be arrested, right? Because Costa Rica recently changed its constitution, and that allows Costa Rican nationals to be extradited to the US for international drug trafficking offenses. So, how could these changes, as well as the kind of high profile arrest, like the ones that we've seen of Gamboa, how do you think these things will affect criminal actors and markets, both in Costa Rica and the region?
I think this is an opportunity to reflect two main things. The one is a clear message on the arrest, in the sense that it's a way of recovering the capacity of the state to counter organized crime, and also saying that it saying that investigations take time, but it brings result, and no matter who is involved, there will be a penalty for that person that committed these such crimes.
But we know that before he was arrested, right, on these charges, Gamboa was working at the highest level of Costa Rica's counter narcotics efforts, right? So there is a question around how prevalent is corruption in the country, and how that could hinder, the fight against the kind of criminal activities that we're talking about, not just cocaine trafficking.
Yes, and in parallel to this, it is important to bring a discussion on the forfeiture law. I think that this is the specific term. in a sense that those that became rich through criminal organizations may lose their properties and their financial wealth because it was illegally built or illegally worth or gained. In a sense that is one of the consequences of corruption and criminal activity. But mentioning that Gamboa in 2018 lost his political position as in the court because he was involved in a corruption case, and then other cases in 2021, 2022 that was known as Cochinilla case was one that also brought to the evidence to the surface the connection with enterprises and political leaders in the country, which means that it's not only a criminal activity that connects to narco trafficking, but also political corruption that benefits enterprises and politicians in while dismantling the institutional structure.
Now, the last question I have for you, Maurizio, is do you think we will see many more such arrests like this in the future?
Well, then I would not say in the future, but in the present. It is important for the listener to understand that investigations on this one that arrested Celso Gamboa takes time. And I hope that we can see more results from these investigations in the short time. 2 more years, 3 more years. But also nowadays, what we are seeing here in Costa Rica, the PCD, the Police on Drug Control, is doing its work as OIJ is doing its work. It means that there is a lot of challenges on this disarticulation, and that unfortunately, as much as we see these cases coming up, we see that there was a criminal activity taking place. So it's, even though it means a happy end, it is frustrating because there was a criminal activity that was permeated in the state.
Well, thank you for joining me on this episode of The Index, and a special thank you to Maurizio Vieira for his insights. If you'd like to learn more about criminality and resilience in Costa Rica, please head over to ocindex.net.